Welcome back to Future Travel. I'm your host, Robert Wesley. Today's guest is Brett Catlin, Vice President of Alaska Air Group, covering loyalty, co-brand partnership, alliances, global sales, and international growth. Wow, Brett, how do they talk you into taking so much on at the same time? Today, on the show, we're going to poke around two linked concepts. So those concepts are customization and personalization. And we're going to talk about how those relate to what we're seeing nowadays in the travel space, and especially with airlines. So Brett, welcome to the show.
Robert, thanks so much for having me on. And you're right, it's a super exciting time at Air Group in terms of everything we're doing, international growth, new loyalty platforms. And I think what you've teed up is highly relevant to us and where we're at and quite topical. So excited to spend a few minutes having a discussion with you.
Awesome. Really appreciate you joining us. So we've kind of talked about this previously, this analogy of customization as a mezzanine for personalization. Now that sounds kind of cool, but what does that actually mean? What is...
Yeah, I think for Air Group, which is inclusive of Alaska and Hawaiian as operating brands, we've long had close relationships with our customers. We've offered kind of a compelling rewards proposition. At the same time, we've aspired to get more to one-to-one personalization. It's something we've been talking about for many years, as has the industry. For as long as I've been a part of the community, with 20 years, we've been talking about personalization. And I think at some point we had the realization that, yes, that is the goal, is to get to a one-to-one type state. However, realistically, we're many years away from getting there. And so let's start with something that we can go deliver to add value for our guests, to create value for our business in the near term. And that's where we decided to anchor on this idea of customization, which, again, this idea of a mezzanine, like it's a stopping point on the road to personalization, but there's things we can do today around customization, and we can go deeper on what we already have in market, what we're bringing to market, and how we think that, one, creates value for Air Group, but then also makes our proposition more compelling for guests in a way that brings them into our program at Most Rewards.
All right, that sounds great. Well, before we jump into the details of how you guys are approaching it, let's sort of break down the concepts a little bit further for us. So we're kind of traditionally thinking about segmentation, we think about customization, we think about personalization, and like what is really the difference between the two? Like, can you do enough with segmentation that allows you to get some personalization, or are we just like getting in a word soup here?
I think the question of semantics is a relevant one. Like, what is personalization ultimately? I think at Air Group, the way we think about it is that one-to-one relationship, that we know you, Robert, and we are going to give you a differential offer than what we are going to give Brett. And the reality is, doing that on a scaled basis is quite difficult, especially when you're working in many decades worth of systems like you are in an airline the size of Air Group. And so I think that's one consideration. For us, when we think about customization, though, it's more cohort-based. So you've either opted in, you've given us zero-party data, we know who you are, and we can place you within like customers and then give you a set of offers. And then I think segmentation is a derivative of that. But really for us, we think about it in terms of the customization and personalization dimensions.
Okay, very interesting. And so what is this kind of unlocking for you guys, this customization part? Is it like trust? Is it fairness? Is it like getting clean signals in about the cohorts? Or is it like operational feasibility of what you're trying to make happen?
Yes, I think would be the answer. Like the beauty of breaking our member base into cohorts is we can do a number of things. First, we can get zero-party data. We can learn more about you in a way that doesn't come across as intrusive. It's information you're happy to give us because we can provide you a better product, which is the second item. We can offer you rewards that are valuable to you, that you want to receive. And three, that allows us, one, to manage our costs, because giving you something that you don't value that actually has a cost to us, that means that we can't invest in the things that you do value. And then the fourth piece is this ability to operationalize it, and having a subset of cohorts allows us to actually do it in a way at scale that, with where our systems are at today, is obtainable. And so ultimately it comes to those three things, right?
Yeah, okay. I'm intrigued by one aspect of the customization that I've seen so far from you guys, and we can now sort of drop into a little bit of the details about how you've addressed these concepts or operationalized them in your program. So we're talking about like earning loyalty rewards, earning miles, earning points. So I think as far as I understand, you still have three options there for the customer, right? And this is really intriguing for me. So like traditionally we think about earning miles from airlines. We think about, okay, we're traveling a certain number of miles and that's why they're called miles and we get the points from that. So you have three options now. Just describe about those three and how'd you come to three?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so I think for Air Group, if you think about where we're operationalizing and bringing this idea of customization to market, there's three attributes of the program. And I'll kind of come back to your question explicitly, Robert. But the first is this idea of milestone rewards, where as you fly more with us, you get to pick the benefits that you value. That you see across the industry. It's fairly common, air, hotel, other types of programs. The second is this idea of communities, which I'd love to spend some time there. It's both based on geography and lifestyle, and it's opt in. And so that becomes quite interesting. We have two communities live today. We'll have six live later this year. Then the third, which you're referencing, is this idea of choice around how you accrue points and work towards status. And so, choice for us to your question specifically, yes, historically, airlines have offered distance based accrual. Fly a mile, get a point. In the US market and most global markets now, carriers have moved to revenue, which is what you see across other consumer type loyalty programs, whether it's Sephora with beauty products or Hilton with hotels. Consumers, in many respects, now they're used to getting a set number of points based on what they buy, the value of that. Then the third for us is the frequency of travel. And so if you think about our network and where we operate at Air Group, there's actually different use cases and why a consumer, a member in our program might preference one over the other. The example I'd give you is we operate a large network in Hawaii, inter-island flights going between, say, Maui and Honolulu or Lahui and Honolulu. 20% of our customers in Hawaii only fly inter-island. Neighbor island flights, that's the extent of their travel. And so for them, being rewarded on frequency, they can get a lot more value in that instance. Now, the other end of the spectrum is somebody who exclusively is flying long haul business class flights, say Seattle to London, tickets that are $4,000 or $5,000 each way, almost always want revenue based accrual because it's going to reward them for their spend, right? And then you have people in the middle that are maybe more leisure, they're mixed travel, and they might prioritize distance. And so the unlock for us with choice was to meet our members where they're at. This idea of loyalty on your terms, recognizing that this one size fits all model that's still prevalent in the industry, it actually doesn't allow people to be rewarded in the way that they want to be rewarded.
Interesting. Very interesting. And so you allow people to switch those preferences once a year.
Yeah, it's
And
an annual program. And so you can, if you want to opt in
yeah,
and select, you can. It's not a requirement. I think the idea is we want it to be lightweight as well, because there are people that very much want to do this. There's also a subset, a very large subset of travelers that don't want to think about it. They want to
yeah,
join a rewards program and get rewards and use the rewards. And their angle is not to go and game every dimension and to extract maximum value. And so we want to make it easy for those guests. Now, the guests that want to extract maximum value, we want the program to work for them as well.
yeah. So talking to that a little bit more. So if we think about friction, introducing friction into the process, I mean, traditionally when people think about airline miles programs, they think about, okay, it's easy that they fly and they get points and they have those and there's a balance. And then sometimes it's not so easy to use them or they devalue and stuff like that. Providing like the customization gives them a bit more agency, perhaps in the process, gets them a little bit more involved. But each time we like introduce something into that user flow, into that customer flow, there's also a bit of friction. And so when you're thinking about the customization menu, what is like too much and like what's too little? How do we give them that ability without scaring them off that this is a longer process? Or
It's a terrific question. It's where we're spending a lot of our time is what is the member's experience with the program? Not what does the program offer? Like we're very clear on that. It's the member's experience with the program. So I'll give you an example. Like how do we onboard a new member? Do you present them with, okay, welcome to Atmos Rewards. Now pick how you want to earn. Now choose your community. Now link to our partners like Lyft. Now get a credit card. I think that's very overwhelming. And the reality is many members, to my earlier point, they want to click the do it for me button. And essentially they want to join the program. They want it to be easy. Others want to customize it. And so part of what we're building out is just that, where the folks that want to customize it have that opportunity. And the folks that don't want that cognitive load, they want it to be easy. It works for them as well. And so mechanically, that may be something like we're going to auto opt people into revenue based accrual. So in that scenario, we're not going to ask you when you join the program necessarily how you want to earn. But if you tell us that you live in Hawaii because you give us a Hawaii zip code, we're going to recommend to you, you should join Huaka'i by Hawaiian, which is our community for Hawaii based residents. And so I think it's that type of example where you could always choose to opt into a different community, but we're going to try and recognize what is likely the best fit for you based on the information you've given us.
Okay, so let's talk about communities then. It's a good segue. So how do communities fit into this customization or customer engagement or learning more about how you can personalize that journey for the customer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If I was going to frame like the why behind communities, it's this idea that we want to offer a loyalty program that's for all types of travelers. And our observation is particularly in the US market, but I think it applies globally. Loyalty programs, particularly for air, have become designed around that top tier of traveler, the person that spends a lot of money. And they're very valuable. We want those travelers as well, no question about that. But the pyramid is big, right? And we want people in the middle of the pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid, to also be excited about the program and to want to engage. And so communities, that's our way of doing that. We have a status program that offers outsized benefits, but most people, they're not going to travel enough. They're not going to spend enough to earn that status. And so the question becomes, how do you bring them in and get them engaged in the program? And this is where communities comes in for us. We offer two communities today. They're geographically based communities. One's in the state of Alaska. It's called Club 49. One is in the state of Hawaii. It's called Huaka'i by Hawaiian. We'll roll out four more communities later this year that are more lifestyle communities. One will be called Families on the Go. And so you opt into that. Perhaps you have kids, you'll get extra benefits when you're traveling with your family. There's other accoutrements that go with that, but in essence, that would be the package. There's another that is called Active Escapes, somebody that enjoys an outdoor enthusiast per se, or that's what gets them excited. It's why they travel. You'll get extra benefits in that cohort. The third is a food and wine based program. So, like culinary adventures is what it's called. But example of what you might get there is we offer a dining rewards program. So you might get 20% extra points when your Atmos account is used for dining out, as an example. Or we offer a program called Wine Flies Free. And so when you go and you buy a case of wine at a wonderful winery in Northern California, you can fly it home at no baggage charge. And so these are not benefits that are massively expensive for us to fulfill, but by segmenting the population, by customizing it to what people want, we can offer a lot more value and say that families on the go or Huaka'i than we could if we said, look, everybody gets every benefit. It would just be way too costly.
Yeah, I love it. So it just brings to mind the issue of data. And so like in that you're also trying to collect data, you're trying to test your assumptions about what you're offering people, what they like. How do you think about data? Obviously the customer's giving you data when they're doing active customization for you. But what else? What else are you looking for? What's the golden nuggets of data that are going to help you further personalize the experience for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of this comes back to the relationship, and you mentioned a word earlier, trust that we have with our members. And zero party data, in many respects, is about building that trust and then using the information that a member's given you responsibly. And so, again, this comes back to customization allows us to step into that journey as opposed to going right to personalization, where you just introduce a lot of risk in terms of that trust relationship between program and member. And so the information we're asking from members is it's quite modest. You tell us if you want to be in Families on the Go, as an example, and we're going to infer that you probably have a family. You tell us you want to be in Huaka'i by Hawaii, and we're going to infer that you probably live in Hawaii. And so I think it is inference as the rule as opposed to explicit transfer of information that somebody may not want to share.
Right. And you can store those as like vectors for the individual. So you'll understand
Exactly.
a little bit more about the preference vector for them. All right, super cool.
I think it's really interesting, Robert, if you take that to like the next step, we have a ton of partnerships. And so now if I know you're in the Families on the Go program, take one of our partners, Greenlight, that has an amazing app for teaching kids financial literacy. Now I can market those guests, those members, the Greenlight app, as opposed to marketing it to everybody in our program, which is somewhat ineffective.
Yeah, yeah. So we're doing a lot of work ourselves on this right now, and we're launching a couple new AI agents to interact with customers on rewards. So we're right in that same seam of like, how much does the customer give, and then what can you actually do with it, and then what are those lines in between inferring too much or suggesting too much, and then kind of like respecting the boundaries. Do you have any additional follow up on that? I mean, obviously opting in makes the biggest difference. So you're opting in to create a better experience for yourself.
Yeah, I think our perspective is this is very much a dynamic where you go slow to ultimately go fast. And so I think where we're culturally and just in people's acceptance of the technology and adoption is we want to start to get people comfortable with the concept. And again, customization versus personalization, such that when people have ultimately come to a level of comfort that they're willing to allow more, then it permits us to go deeper on that personalization journey.
Yeah, super interesting. All right. I noticed also you have free Wi-Fi now for loyalty members. Let's get sidetracked on that for a second. So what's the strategic tie-in between the loyalty membership and the Wi-Fi? Is that retention acquisition funnel, or is that just a better signal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, free Wi-Fi has been one of those slowly then suddenly type dynamics where we've talked about it as an industry for quite some time, and there's smaller players that offered it, but no carrier really at scale offered free Wi-Fi. And then almost overnight, it's happened, right? Like you look across the industry, the number of carriers that have announced free Wi-Fi in the past 18 months, it's staggering. It's become a table stakes benefit very, very quickly. And so, in many respects, to your question, the thesis is by offering free Wi-Fi, we require membership. You get more members in the funnel.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that in the U.S. market translates to more credit cards. Like if you were going to take the math and go right from like activity to value creation, it is more members in the funnel, more people to market to, more credit card acquisition, and then all the economics that come with that card. And there's obviously a lot more value to be created from having somebody engaged in a program, whether it's direct, I'm going to buy another airline ticket, I'm going to engage with the program other ways. But ultimately, the business case is predicated on we need more people in the program so that we have a bigger marketing database that we can speak to about high value products such as the credit card.
Yeah, I think it's a smart move myself. So you're also working, like I said, you have a massive portfolio of responsibilities there. So you're also doing co-brand and partnerships. So let's touch on that for a second. Like, how do you? I was just thinking about like the experience. So how do you keep that experience coherent when you're co-branding, you're co-marketing, you're partnering, and like who's owning that relationship, and how do you? What is the secret with working with partners and co-branding?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, look, in the U.S. market, the co-brand it's a fundamental part of an airline's economic construct. Air Group, 15 billion of revenue plus or minus, multiple billions of that come from our co-brand relationship. So having a very, very tight partnership, we work with Bank of America, is absolutely critical because of the importance of the business, the value it's creating. Now, ultimately, to do that, to your question, the guest needs to have a seamless experience. And what you've seen over the past 5 years or so is cards have become deeply integrated into the programs. Before it was more arm's length, like it was a way to get currency in the program. Maybe you got a free bag, maybe you got priority boarding. That's all changed now, where in many respects, these programs are fully integrated to the card. You can get status through your card, you can get all of these types of benefits. So, the example I'd give you is over the summer, we launched a new premium card called the Atmos Rewards Summit Card. And that card is really designed as an extension of the airline. The benefits that we hang on that product are all airline fulfilled. So it's things like a global companion award or a travel delay credit, the ability to transfer points. There are things that, in many respects, only an airline could offer. And it allows us to compete with banks, which have strong proprietary programs themselves. So you think about Chase Ultimate Rewards, Amex membership rewards. And so you've seen airlines, I think, given that competitive dimension, really lean into what it is we do, which is air travel, and try and make that more integrated with the cards as opposed to just being a currency type dynamic.
I love that. I mean, just like a personal bias of mine, I bias away from the transactional relationships in loyalty and rewards, even though sometimes we think about them when we're managing rewards programs or we're building the technology for them. We're thinking about arbitrage, we're thinking about currency dynamics and all of that. But fundamentally, it's about something more than that. It's about an emotional relationship with the customer, and whether the points or the miles help incentivize or help drive the relationship or encourage it, that's really the point of it.
And there is this risk, but I think of points as a commodity,
Hmm.
especially with these transferable currencies, which have, I think, proliferated in the US market globally. And so you have to find that competitive advantage, which comes back to the core of what we do every day, which is ultimately provide travel.
Yeah. So I mean, it's an issue that we're working on ourselves, and we have some answers for it, but it's still fundamentally an exploratory phase now when we consider intermediation, specifically through AI agents. So one of the things we're working right now, as I mentioned to or alluded to, was the AI agent development. So we're thinking really hard right now about how you can still engender loyalty, how you can still develop emotional connections, even when you may have like an agent in the middle. Do you have any thoughts on this? We're sort of like feeling like we're on the cusp of these agent-based bookings, these agent-based transactions for commerce. And then if there is emotional connection to loyalty, how can we, what are some ways in which we can think about how to accomplish that even in an intermediary environment?
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. It's absolutely one we're contemplating because ultimately, to your point, Robert, loyalty is about that relationship with the member, the guest in the case of an airline. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to have that relationship and that the program doesn't become strictly transactional because then you get back in this dynamic where it becomes an unsustainable cost for a revenue value that is, it can be quite profound, but the cost has to be managed. And a lot of that comes down to how members want to engage. If they value arbitrage, if they don't, there's all these kind of second order questions that come from that. Because I'll take the example of arbitrage on a currency basis and something that a lot of people get value out of in the Atmos Rewards program. If you have agentic agents that are going and essentially giving you the answer, then it's very hard for us to provide arbitrage if there's perfect information in the marketplace. And so that means the guests, the members that value that ultimately can't extract or derive that same benefit. Whereas perhaps people that didn't historically are now able to participate in a way that they couldn't or didn't expect to. And so I think managing that becomes a really interesting question for folks that are operating loyalty programs like we are.
Yeah, and it also probably it drive the decision process from the agent towards programs maybe like yours, which is less sort of transactional and more towards like value to the consumer. So that's one thing that agents can really associate. So if they can get more, if they have a better value, it's a better experience for their customer, they can also prioritize and arbitrage opportunities within rewards as well. So, all right, how about one prediction? If we looked sort of in the future, let's say maybe 2 years, do you think there'll be any sort of meaningful difference in airline loyalty between, let's say, now, what's going right now, and then maybe like 2, 3 years, or just like that right over the horizon? Because it's so dynamic right now with technology development and things. How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that the question of what's over the horizon, uh, I'm not sure it's in 2 or 3 years to answer directly. This is an industry that tends to move slowly. It tends to move in increments. And so what I suspect in a couple of years, you won't see this massive foundational change in terms of how loyalty programs are rewarding or incentivizing members to a certain behavior. I think there's a number of dimensions at play that kind of come back to where we started around personalization and creating a program for you, Robert, or for me, Brett. I think that's more than 2 or 3 years off, which is again, the more that we can get that zero party data and start to be on that journey, the better position I think we'll be as Atmos Reward to then deliver on that personalization, which truly would be a revolution in terms of how value is provided if it was that one-to-one personalized type experience. But I think we're more than 2 or 3 years off from that. And so the goal is how do we start to seed the concept, knowing that technology is getting us there sooner than later.
Yeah, I also agree. Great examples. All right, so wrapping things up, since we're about out of time here, maybe a couple quick fire questions for you. So, what would you think is like the most misunderstood word in loyalty? What do people trip up on, or what do you find yourself like having to explain something?
Interesting. Yeah, I think arbitrage is one only because it is somewhat of an arcane term. People tend to get it if you are deep in, say, the points and miles game, but it isn't necessarily kind of a kitchen table type term.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there anything specifically do you think airlines in general should stop doing right now in terms of loyalty?
Interesting. I do think this dynamic around how programs work with transferable points, like it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because you're disintermediating the program. If it's easy to get the points through a third party, and that third party can offer members ultimately a better product because it offers more flexibility. And so I think that becomes a really interesting strategic question. And I think on our side, Atmos Rewards, you have seen us be very deliberate around the currencies that we partner with, recognizing that we want the value to accrue to our products, to our co-brands, to our partners, as opposed to coming through a third party.
Great. We're definitely right in the middle of that issue ourselves. All right. So, best example of, let's say, simple customization really done well in any industry, not just airlines. Maybe you've done it, but customization done simple. If you think about a couple examples, or maybe just one, anything
Yeah,
come to
look,
mind?
the one that gets me really excited is this ability to share benefits. As a traveler, business traveler, I spend a lot of time away from my family. And part of the payoff is when my spouse travels or when my kids travel, I want them to see the experiences I do. Maybe to sit in a premium cabin, to get an upgrade to a suite, to get free breakfast at a hotel. And so this idea of being able to share benefits, I think is really a really powerful way to engender loyalty and ultimately a subtle customization that I think if done well offers a lot of value and stickiness to a program.
Awesome. All right. So, we're wrapped up now. So I wanted to thank you very much for joining us. It was incredibly interesting and it was very concise and very informative. Thanks so much for joining us. Any last words for our audience?
No, thank you for having me, Robert. I think, look, as I kind of led with a super exciting time at Air Group, whether it was the launch of Atmos Rewards last summer or global expansion, I think how we view a loyalty program and what it can mean to people kind of across the travel spectrum in terms of frequency or value, it's a really exciting program to get to engage with, and we're excited to bring all these features to market over the next few months to deliver a better experience.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brett. We'll be following you guys closely in your journey this year.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert.
All right. See you next time.